That magical sound you are hearing all across the country, our basketball's bouncing at college practices and exhibition games are coming soon. Everyone also wants to know about the SEC, conference home to the reigning national champions. What to look for in 22-23 in the SEC, and it all starts right now.
You are Locked On Women's Basketball, your daily podcast on women's basketball. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Happy Monday, friends. It is October 17th, 2022. I am Missy Heidrick, National Women's Basketball Correspondent at The Next. Thank you so much for joining us. And thank you for making Locked On Women's Basketball your first listen every day. We are free and available wherever you get your podcasts. Make sure to follow me, Missy Heidrick, on Twitter. And be sure to follow The Next at The Next Hoops and this podcast at Locked On WBB. Well, the past couple weeks, we have dove into a host of conferences to highlight games and teams all across the country. Today, we're going to dig into the SEC, possibly the number one conference in America in women's basketball. We'll talk about the reigning national champions, South Carolina, and who's who of teams, players, and coaches, and some conference games to set your DVR for that you do not want to miss. Joining me today, I am so happy to have Gabriella Lewis, one of the fantastic journalists at The Next, who covers a wide swath of geography and teams when it comes to the SEC. She'll even be at SEC Media Days, actually, which I believe is tomorrow, October 18th. But Gabriella, here, let's get started, my dear. Let's think about where we were last spring as South Carolina is crowned the national champions, and a few different faces, a couple leave, new ones join, but really it's incredibly difficult to find anybody, I think, that's going to bet against South Carolina to start this season with what Dawn Staley brings back for the 22-23 season. What's the vibe at SEC country, and really what's everybody talking about when they talk about South Carolina?
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely South Carolina's year. I mean, it was last year, obviously, and I think they're pretty unanimously the team to beat, especially with, some of the injuries that we've seen out of UConn and some other shifts. So I think, the SEC it's all about every team, but I think people are obviously focused in on South Carolina. And, I think it's a really interesting year in the SEC. You've also got a lot of influx, right? Teams like LSU are kind of on the rise, things like that, Tennessee. But then also you had some really important people leave the conference to join the draft and had a great year in their rookie years, folks like Ryan Howard, Shakira Austin. And so I think it's definitely a year of transition for a lot of teams, but also, I think things are going to look different from last year in a lot of ways and who's really, winning. But, I think South Carolina is going to continue to be on top. And when you keep players like Aliyah Boston, in that core there, as well as Missy Cooke, like, you're going to continue to play well.
Yeah, it's hard not to. And you mentioned the draft, and we saw players go to the WNBA, and there was just a fantastic rookie class that I think made a mark on the WNBA this year. One of those people being Destiny Henderson, who was such a vital part of that run to the national championship for South Carolina last year. So they don't necessarily have her out front, but there are other pieces of the puzzle. One of those to me, which I think is going to be an interesting kind of shake up more or less, because she didn't see a lot of time before injury last year, is redshirt freshman guard Raven Johnson. Now, she was highly sought after coming out of high school as one of the best recruits in the class of 21. She goes down with an injury, misses most of last year, but now it's another fresh face in that backcourt. And if I'm Dawn Staley, we know that she's going to be tough on new guards, but this might just be the type of person that can replace a Destiny Henderson, and you maybe don't miss a beat.
Absolutely. Yeah. I think they've got some new talent in. They've also, they don't have a ton of pardon me, they don't have a ton of folks coming in from the transfer portal, but they do have a few that, especially in that veteran guard position, they're really going to need. Kiara Fletcher was previously at Georgia Tech,
Yeah.
and she's also kind of this important veteran point guard presence. And she, played 2 years at Georgia Tech and 2 years elsewhere. So, yeah, I think that's kind of where there may be some loose footing with Henderson just being a real powerhouse. But I think they continue to have really good other options, and Dawn Staley, she knows how to coach.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. And again, when you've got the Naismith Player of the Year in your front court
Mhm.
and she can do a little bit of everything for you, as long as Aliyah Boston stays healthy, again, my motto always is you've got to be the best, you have to beat the best. So if
Right.
someone wants to unseed and take South Carolina off that number one spot throughout the course of this year, and every poll we're going to see from here to Kingdom Come, I feel
Mhm.
like you're going to be the people that are going to step up and beat them. And
Right.
as Aliyah Boston goes, she stays healthy and has another fantastic year. It's going to be hard to bet against South Carolina. Now, one of the other teams you mentioned LSU. I
Yes.
think one of the other interesting teams for me is what it looks like at Tennessee, because I think
Mhm.
what Kelly Harper has been able to do with the transfer portal, in addition to kind of surrounding her returners, it seems to me that this might be the year Tennessee kind of makes that next jump. They had
Yes.
injuries at the end of last year. They got themselves in the NCAA tournament. They were in that Sweet 16, but couldn't get over the hump. Seems to me, with a plethora of talent, that this just might be Tennessee's year.
Yeah, I think they've got so many folks who are really going to be important for them. Rakia Jackson, coming out of MSU, joining them at Tennessee, I think is going to be really important. Tamari Key, which they, already had last year, is a really important member. Jasmine Franklin, as well as also Jasmine Powell coming in off the transfer portal. Yeah, I'm new to the SEC covering this, but I think what's so interesting is that you not only have the reigning champs and who's good now, but you have this history with teams like Tennessee and other teams who have, Kim Mulkey, who was not winning in the SEC, but now is here in the SEC. And you have this history. And I think Tennessee, I completely agree this year, coming off the transfer portal, coming off, some injury last year, this could really be their year to kind of bring back and start to look back at that dynasty that, when you build it like that, it's easier to come back to.
Oh, absolutely, 100%. And there is. I mean, the SEC, having been one of the best conferences in the nation throughout the
Mhm.
course of the past couple decades, there's a ton of history in this league as it relates to women's basketball, women's sports in general. But you mentioned Kim Mulkey, you mentioned LSU. I think her first year in Baton Rouge really has to be a success for everybody on every level,
Mhm.
from fan support to hosting NCAA tournament for their success. But that they most definitely are going to look a little bit different because of graduation. They were senior heavy last year. Alexis Morris comes back as that fifth year senior at point guard, but really it's going to be a lot of other faces. And it kind of seems as though now this really will be a team that Kim Mulkey molds herself, that it isn't necessarily using players that, you're kind of handed and then you deal with what you got. But this seems to be more of a Mulkey type roster that she's going to want to move forward, and then they could compete for that top spot in the league.
Completely. And I think we have to talk about Angel Reese when we're discussing that, right? That's a huge get out of Maryland. Most projections have her as the number one most influential, transfer of this season. And in a historic transfer year, that's a big deal.
Yes.
And so, yeah, no, I think LSU, I just think is going to have a really transformative year. And, Kim Mulkey off the court, you can say a lot of things about her. And, I'm curious, honestly, how that's going to affect team rapport. I think she's come under a lot of criticism of how she's treated her players, and specifically in the light of the BG situation. But I will say she really has a strong roster and she's building something. And so I'm that's the team that I'm the most interested to watch is this going to work? Is this going to happen? Are you going to have these pieces come together and really build something really important? And yeah, I mean, who knows? That's the beauty of sports. That's the beauty of basketball, is that we get to go watch it. But yeah, and then they also have some good other transfers of Ladizia Williams coming from South Carolina, and so yeah, no, there's a lot of excitement, I think, in Baton Rouge. Also, like, it's been a while. Kim Mulkey is important for this program in a lot of ways.
No, absolutely. And I think you hit it right at the sweet spot, in the sense of the transfer portal does so many great things for everybody, and it's opportunity. We know that it allows student athletes to move around, but it also then is kind of the rubber hits the road for coaches, right? To be able to mold your roster together, to be able to say, is this, are we going to be able to make this work now? We've got a ton of new faces coming from all different places. Everyone has their own high expectations when they show up on a campus, and it is up to that coaching staff to be able to put, their stamp on it, but then also to be able to say, hey, this is what we have to do to be competitive. Our job here is to win games. We want to be able to move up. LSU with their season last year, they finished 13-3 in the SEC, 25-5 overall. I mean, those are numbers that you can't argue with,
right.
But that also makes it highly, highly competitive at the top.
Yes.
Okay. So we're going to talk in just a moment. Next up, we're going to break down some of the talent, a couple new coaches also in this league in the SEC. But first, are you wasting money on subscriptions? It happens to all of us. I know it happens at my house. 80% of people have subscriptions that they forget about. And for you, it could be an unused Prime account or a Hulu account that never gets streamed. Then there's this great app I use that helps track all expenses. And because of it, people no longer are wasting money on subscriptions that they don't use. You might have heard of it. It's called Rocket Money, formerly known as Truebill. The app shows you all your subscriptions in one place and cancels what you don't want for you. Rocket Money can even find subscriptions that you didn't know you were paying for. You may even find out you've been double charged for a subscription. To cancel a subscription, all you have to do is press cancel, and Rocket Money takes care of the rest. Cancel unnecessary subscriptions with Rocket Money today. Go to rocketmoney.com/LockedOnNBA. Seriously, it could save you hundreds per year. That's rocketmoney.com/LockedOnNBA. I am Missy Heidrick, and thank you for making Locked On Women's Basketball your first listen. Now make your second listen game to game. Every moment, every top performance, every result in leagues and conferences all across the country. Locked On Game to Game covers every game from across those leagues and conferences you want to talk about, with local analysis that only Locked On can deliver. Follow Game to Game on Locked On and be available on Odyssey app, YouTube, and wherever you get your podcasts. Hi, everybody. I am Missy Heidrick. Thank you so much for joining us here on Locked On Women's Basketball. I am with Gabriella Lewis. All right, Gabriella, we talked about some of that top talent. I think there's a couple other teams for me that are interesting in the SEC this year. One of them being Ole Miss. We saw them make the jump last year, get back in that NCAA tournament. They're going to be without Shakira Austin, who had a fantastic rookie season in the WNBA. What's this kind of the rumble, the thought process on Ole Miss? Will they continue to be one of those teams that kind of sits in the middle of the pack? Because if you're the middle of the pack in the SEC, that's not a bad place to be when NCAA tournament time comes.
Yeah, no, I definitely think that they have the possibility to really stay, like you said, the SEC is potentially one of the more competitive conferences in the country, if not the most. And, if you're staying in the middle there, you're doing well. And I definitely think they have the possibility to, right? They've got Maya Taylor, who's a transfer from Mississippi State, which is a pretty big get. I think she'll be an important position there, as well as also they have Angel Baker, who, is the 6th player of the year last year. So they do, have some folks who are important. And they're obviously going to miss Shakira Austin, right? She just won a gold medal at the World Cup. She had an incredible rookie season, as well as also a senior season. And so I can't say that that's not going to hurt them, but I do think that there's a lot of possibility there to be able to kind of capitalize off of what they did last year. But, they had 10 players either finishing their eligibility or electing to transfer last season. So there was a bit of an exodus. But that's another team where I think things could kind of go either way. But, I think Yolette McPhee-McQueen is their coach. And I think she's got some really strong roots to be able to, pull things together.
Absolutely. One other team that jumps out at me before we talk about some of the coaching changes is Arkansas. And you look at where they were last year at 7-9, 18-13 overall. Not at all, I think, the season that Mike Neighbors was looking for after having such a trajectory of a couple seasons of really big time success in Fayetteville. I'll be interested to see what kind of team that they bring to the floor, because they've got some new faces with the transfer portal, etc., as most everybody in the country does. It's about molding that team together. But if I'm Mike Neighbors, he likes fast pace. They want to get out and guard, and they want to get out in transition. But sometimes you got to have the bodies, and you got to have the people that can pull that game plan off. Maybe your thought on where Arkansas sits in this, and will we see them make that jump towards the upper portion of this league this season?
Yeah, we'll see. I mean, I think they have Samar Spencer, who was the freshman of the year last year in the SEC. And I think that's obviously, having young talent like that. And, as well as also folks like Amber Ramirez, who was named the second team last year. Those are good. But, what concerns me about Arkansas is they definitely have some talent coming to the transfer portal, but compared to the rest of the SEC and honestly compared to the rest of the country, it's not like they had a huge haul. And I think when you're seeing the LSUs, when you're seeing the Tennessees, even other programs like Ole Miss, things like that, that's a little bit concerning, right? Are you going to be able to stay competitive? And, you have seasoned coaching there, which is good. But I'm not sure if they, to hit a slump after that year, I'm not sure they're inserting the energy they may need that other teams will, right? Like I think of Texas A&M with Joni Taylor going there. I think they are going to have a really resurgence of energy that is going to be extremely important for them. I think of Florida, they not a new coach, but, a young, exciting coach who's really kind of bringing new things to the table. I know we'll kind of get into this. So, I think Arkansas totally has potential, but, it concerns me on comparison to some of the other teams in this conference.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. And it's question marks, right? I mean, we know every team's got question marks. We know that they're all going to have to answer some of those. Some will answer them earlier. Some will take a few weeks. It may even take a couple months to be able to answer some of the questions about some of these teams. But I think Arkansas might present a host of more than maybe others, especially when you think about how competitive night in, night out it is in the SEC. Okay, so let's talk about some of these new faces and new coaches. Now, one is really just a change, and then it created a domino effect. Right. So when Taylor goes to Texas A&M, that leaves the Georgia job open, and Katie Abramson Henderson takes that job, comes from Central Florida, and with her came a host of bodies and people and top-notch talent. So let's talk about Georgia first, because you mentioned, I think, the history, sort of the programmatic long-term success that we see in the SEC, and Georgia's had that. It was Andy Landers, Joni Taylor had that program. They are, consistently in the top half of the SEC and in the tournament. But now when you look at the talent that's coming with Coach Abe to Georgia, I mean, they jump up pretty fast on everybody's top 5 list in a quick hurry.
Absolutely. Yeah, no, I think, we love a domino effect, right? That's so fun. And this was a dramatic one, right? Like, I think UGA is going to be, UGA is, close to me. Hopefully I'll be seeing quite a few games on that. But yeah, I think someone that is especially important is Diamond Battles that's coming to UGA. And, also I just think it's something to note that you have a bunch of players who follow their coach, right? That means that they have made this coach has made a pretty tremendous impact on their lives. And, after covering the Dream last season with Tanisha Wright, just seeing what a bond, what a core that is. And then, I also, just around when you have a good coach and when you really care for one another. And, someone else I covered on the Dream was Maya Caldwell, who came out of UGA. And, I think people really care about that program at UGA, and they really care about the grit that they bring to that program. And I just see high buy-in. And I think that's really good for the folks who are there. And, so much of winning is team culture. So I'm really excited for that. And I'm also, I think Joni Taylor going to Texas A&M is going to be another really fascinating thing that we're going to see. And like you said, domino effect definitely affected quite a few folks, including her husband leaving the Dreams coaching staff.
Right.
And so, yeah, I think we've got an exciting moment there. And one of the games that I'm really excited for is the UGA Texas A&M game. I'm calling it the Joni Taylor game.
Yeah, no, I think you're right. And I think you talked about energy, and, there's such a long-term history of success of Texas A&M women's basketball and what Karen Blair did there in winning a national championship and building that. But, sometimes it does. It just takes a new breath of energy, something different philosophy, different recruiting philosophy, maybe. You just never know. And I think both of these coaches bring something new to the table for those programs, which then is only going to enhance what the SEC is all about. One more coach I want to talk about, you mentioned it real quick, and that is Kelly Rae Finley. They took the interim tag off her at Florida last year. It was a tumultuous season in Gainesville for their women's basketball program. But when it was all said and done, that Florida team finished 10-6. They were 21-10. The bottom did not fall out. And I think you have to give some of that credit to her as well as to those young women for sticking together. But maybe your thoughts on this new face, kind of old face, but truly new head coaching face at Florida, and where this program goes, knowing that there is so much talent just in the state of Florida itself, how you can capitalize on it.
That's a great point, and something that, I don't even know if I really thought about how much, a team like that means to the region. But yeah, no, when she was named the head coach, I think people were really excited. It's this young, newer energy, and also coming from a program that, had obviously some real toxicity, some alleged, real issues in the program. And so I think this is a new, something stronger. And I love when a team goes from an interim coach and then they keep that interim coach, because that means they really thought about it. That means that they're bringing on someone who knows the program but really wants to bring something new to it.
Right.
And that team is so young, and so I think they're going to have not some issues, but I just think it's both energy, but they got Aliyah Matheru from Texas, which I think is a good. She will bring some of more of that veteran energy to a pretty young team, and yeah, I think that's such a good point about what they can mean for Florida, right? Like, we've seen this across the country. When you have basketball programs that really matter, that influences everything, and if you can get a team in Florida to really become competitive in a way that they haven't been in a little while, I think that would be a real game changer. And people want to stay close to home in a lot of instances, so why not? And we see so many really dynamic players coming out of Florida.
No, I think that's one of the biggest things. Everybody, it's kind of that untapped scenario of, there really is something to be said about kids saying, you know what, if I can go to a top-notch program and I can play at a P5 school in an SEC type competition, and I can stay close to home or within driving distance or whatever that is, now all of a sudden there's so many more opportunities and so many more kids that are going to look that way and say, you know what, Florida might be the place for me. But that a lot of that will be based on, what Kelly Rae Finley is able to put together this season and kind of the trajectory and the culture she builds there. Now she's got to do it, and it's got to be her own. And I think that's incredibly important. All right, when we come back, we are going to give you some of those key conference matchups. Gabriella already mentioned one, and so we got to look for some games that you're going to want to mark on your calendar, and maybe a few SEC Media Day storylines to keep an eye out as well. But first, BetOnline.net is your number one source for football betting information this season. Find all of the latest player developments, team matchups, news, podcasts, and in-depth articles and analysis on every game you can find. And as always, BetOnline remains your continued source for all of your sports wagering information, with live betting and up-to-the-minute scores for every sport out there. I live in the state of Kansas. Sports wagering is now legal, so it's really hard not to find somebody who's going to be on their phone every weekend. It could be college football, NBA, and it's the NFL. Now you've got the Major League Baseball playoffs. Get ready. Those phones are hot. The fastest and easiest way to check in on all your favorite games and events, as we said, MLB, the playoffs are here, MMA, boxing, and golf. Head to betonline.net or use your mobile device to learn more. BetOnline, where the game starts. All right, everybody. Missy Heidrick here at Locked On Women's Basketball with Gabriella Lewis. Thank you for listening and watching with us. All right, we've talked a lot about some of the teams. We've talked about some of the coaches, but when the rubber meets the road, we know that these teams all going to have tough non-conferences. They're going to set themselves up. But then we get to the end of December and SEC play starts right before the end of the 2022 calendar. The first games are December 29th, and then they skip to New Year's Day on January 1st. But it's hard sometimes because I think we want to try to say, oh, these are going to be the marquee matchups. But yet on the flip side, there's just a lot of really tough places to play in the SEC. Yeah. And if you get good fan support, which they do, and women's basketball is popular, you could go into a place like Arkansas, or you could go to, if you're Georgia and you open at Alabama on December 29th, and all of a sudden Alabama's playing well and they've created some energy, that's a hostile environment. It just seems to me that it's really hard to take a night off in the SEC.
I completely agree. Yeah, I think, even in these matchups that may not, you may think that what one thing's going to happen. We obviously don't know. And I think, like you said, you've got some real energy surrounding women's basketball across the country, but I think definitely in the SEC, and these are schools that they've got great fan bases all around. And so, that should really be exciting. I think, a good example of that is last year in Missouri, South Carolina losing to them. Sophie Cunningham front row going crazy for it. And there's going to be a rematch of that in January, which I think is going to be, that's on my list of games to watch. That one that looked like it really stung for South Carolina. So we'll see if more magic can happen for Missouri.
Yeah, no. And now a couple of teams we talked about, which I think are going to be in that top 25 conversation all season long. Texas A&M goes to South Carolina. That's the first game for both of those teams on December 29th. Once we flip the calendar to 2023, then South Carolina is going to go to Georgia on Monday the 2nd. So right out of the gate, I feel like it's going to kind of set the tone in early January. And then it might even be a matchup of Ole Miss at Georgia. That's middle of January. So again, some of these games I think will tell us a lot early. And it's going to kind of come down to the factor of who's going to be playing well at the time, and that you can't take a night off in this league. But tell me a little bit if there's any others that really kind of strike your fancy that you circle that you're going to be watching.
I'm excited. This is maybe not one that people would bring up immediately, but on January 8th, we've got Tennessee Vanderbilt. Vanderbilt's a program we haven't talked about, but that's another program I'm excited about. You've got Shea Ralph at the helm, and I think they're growing. They may not be top of the SEC this year, but that's important. So that's the battle at Tennessee that I'm excited for. You've got the Georgia Texas A&M game, what I'm calling the Joni Taylor game, on the 22nd. And then you've got LSU Tennessee on the 30th of January, which I think that's going to be a good game. Like I'm saying, I think those are two of those teams where I think they're kind of at a similar level. I think Tennessee, they have the edge there, but we'll see. And then going later, you've got LSU, South Carolina in February, and then South Carolina, Tennessee in February as well. So there's a lot of good stuff, and that's just the interconference play. There's some really exciting stuff where we're seeing, some UConn, South Carolina games, some Stanford, South Carolina, some Tennessee, Stanford. So there's really going to be some exciting matchups.
Oh, absolutely. There'll never be a night where I think that you're not going to see good basketball when it comes to SEC. And as it really is the same message all across every other league in the country, you've got to hold home court and you got to steal a couple on the road. And that's going to be incredibly important. We saw what that sort of momentum did last year for Missouri, beating South Carolina. It gave them just another bump at that part of the season where it could have gone the other direction. The wheels could have fallen off if you were Mizzou, but it didn't. They used that to their advantage. The SEC women's basketball tournament will be held in Greenville, South Carolina. That will be that first week of March. So the regular season ends February 26th. Georgia at South Carolina will be one of the last games on the regular season before they go to the conference tournament. I think that's one to look out for as well. All right. Now, I know you're headed to SEC Media Days this week. Any interesting storylines, anything that you might think might, be on the top of what everybody talks about as they all get together and preview this season?
Yeah, I think all eyes are going to be on South Carolina, right? What does this offseason look like? What's the mentality going into this year? And, when you hear athletes talk about this, sometimes coming off a loss is more motivating than coming off a win. And I think that's something that I'm definitely going to be looking at. You can't really totally see that on media day, but it's important.
Yeah.
I think, some of this exodus, like a team like Kentucky, I'm very interested to hear about, the losing of Ryan Howard. They had a couple other folks leave. And what does that really mean for them in a rebuild? And then, like the teams that we've kind of talked about who are growing and who are potentially going to really make some waves. I think, that'll be interesting. And then last time Kim Mulkey did any sort of media, that really hit viral in our community of, saying that she'd make no comment on Brittany Griner. And that's something that I'm definitely going to be watching out for. I'm sure she'll get questions on that. And, she obviously has made kind of her non-opinion clear. But we'll see if she's got more to say.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. It will be a very interesting storyline to watch.
Yeah.
In an environment that, is open to everybody and gives media as well as a lot of other people a chance to ask those questions. I'll be interested to see if the answer is different or if she stays the way she has. There is, as you said, it creates a lot of conversation. Not only, I think, just in the women's basketball community, but as we have seen, that this has been a topic that has been front and center. It's not just something that's being talked about in sports world. It is a conversation that's happening in a lot of other places. Hard to ignore it. More than likely, probably something that comes up. But let's also hope that everybody that's there continues to keep the focus on how great the SEC is going to be this year and what outstanding basketball I think we're going to see from top to bottom. All right, so I know that the polls aren't out or the rankings or whatever. This is probably one of the easiest questions you get to answer all week. Who do you think wins the SEC this year?
I mean, South Carolina, definitely. But right, we saw them get upset at last year, so you just really never know, and that's why it's so great. But I think record-wise, it would be a shock if it wasn't. But I'm really excited to see some. I think we're going to see definitely some competitive play, and obviously, but I think that someone may give them a run for their money a little bit.
You are absolutely right, and that's the best part of college sports is the fact you never know what you are going to get night in and night out. Just ask Tennessee football fans or Alabama fans. I think some of them are looking at Bruins today, right? So there's a little SEC right back at you.
Exactly.
All right, Gabriella, thank you so much. Tell everybody where they find you on a daily basis and where you'll be this week.
All right. Well, I will be in Birmingham, Alabama tomorrow, and I will be asking all the questions I can. You can find me on Twitter at _Gabriella Lewis. Gabriella is with 2 L's, and I'll be tweeting about all the festivities tomorrow. It's going to be a big day, so follow me over there.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for coming on, and thank you everybody for watching and listening with us. You can find me at Missy Heidrick on Twitter, and all of my amazing colleagues at The Next Hoops and at The Next Hoops on Twitter, and follow this podcast at Locked On WBB. Please join me here on Mondays to talk everything college hoops. Come back this week for more episodes on Locked On Women's Basketball, college basketball news and notes, international basketball highlights and action. And we know that there are WNBA moves coming, especially in those head coaching positions. There's going to be some domino effects, so everybody be ready, and you'll find it all right here with us at Locked On Women's Basketball. Thank you for making Locked On Women's Basketball your first listen every day. Now make your second listen Locked On NBA. The NBA season is here, and our local NBA experts and insiders have you covered on and off the court all season long. All the biggest stories around the NBA every Monday through Friday in less than 30 minutes. Available on YouTube, Odyssey, and wherever you get your podcasts. Thank you, everybody, for listening. Thank you for watching. Come back every day right here on Locked On Women's Basketball. We have got you covered all season long.